every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. There is a profound comfort in the modern illusion that we are always being watched. We complain about the loss of privacy, about the proliferation of security cameras on every street corner, outside every storefront, and in every hallway. Yet, secretly, this surveillance network acts as a psychological safety net. We believe that if something terrible happens, the cameras will bear witness. They will capture the accident, the crime, the abduction. They will provide the answers. But what happens when the camera captures the beginning of a story, only to stare blindly at an empty frame when the ending is supposed to unfold? What happens when the unblinking eye of the security lens records a man walking into a room, but never records him walking out? Today, we dissect the anatomy of an impossible vanishing. We examine a case that defies spatial logic, physics, and the supposed infallibility of our digital safety net. We are looking at the disappearance of 27-year-old Brian Shaffer, a case that has frustrated law enforcement, amateur sleuths, and a devastated family for nearly 2 decades. This is not just a missing persons case. It is a locked room mystery built not of stone and heavy oak doors, but of drywall, escalators, and grainy closed-circuit television footage. To understand the terrifying anomaly of Brian Shaffer's disappearance, we must first understand the man himself and the intense psychological pressure cooker he was living in during the spring of 2006. Brian was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. By all outward appearances, he was a young man with a golden trajectory. He was bright, charismatic, and handsome. He had a tight-knit group of friends, a devoted father named Randy, a younger brother named Derek, and a beautiful girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, who was also a medical student. Brian and Alexis were deeply in love. They had a trip to Miami, Florida, booked for spring break, scheduled to depart on Monday, April 3rd. Alexis, along with both of their families, fully expected that Brian was going to use this romantic getaway as an opportunity to propose. The ring had not been purchased yet, as far as anyone knew, but the intention was a poorly kept secret. Life was pulling Brian toward adulthood, career, and marriage. But beneath this veneer of success and forward momentum, there was a profound and fresh sorrow. Just 3 weeks before the night in question, Brian's mother, Renee, passed away after a brutal battle with myelodysplasia, a form of bone marrow cancer. Brian was incredibly close to his mother. Her death was a catastrophic blow. Friends noted that while he was trying to maintain a brave face, the grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket over him. He was exhausted. Medical school is a grueling marathon under the best of circumstances, requiring endless hours of study and clinical rotations. Adding the emotional devastation of losing a parent turned that marathon into an agonizing crawl. This duality is crucial to the anatomy of this case. We have a subject who is anchored to his life by strong tethers of love, impending engagement, and professional ambition, yet he is simultaneously untethered by a profound, destabilizing grief. When a person in this psychological state vanishes, investigators are immediately forced to weigh the probability of a voluntary disappearance against the possibility of a tragic accident or foul play. Did the pressure simply become too much, or did someone or something intercept a vulnerable young man on a night when he just wanted to forget his pain for a few hours? Friday, March 31st, 2006, was meant to be a release valve. It was the beginning of spring break at Ohio State. Classes were done. The weekend was stretching out ahead, and the Miami trip was just a few days away. Brian, seeking a distraction, made plans to go out drinking with his friend and former roommate William Florence, who went by the name Clint. At around 9 o'clock that evening, Brian and Clint met at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The geography and layout of this specific bar are the most critical components of this entire mystery. The Ugly Tuna was not a standalone building. It was located in the South Campus Gateway Complex, a newly developed, multi-use retail and entertainment hub situated on High Street, the main artery bordering the Ohio State campus. The bar itself was located on the second floor of the complex. To enter the Ugly Tuna, patrons had to walk off the street level, enter a set of double doors, and ride an escalator up to the second floor. At the top of the escalator, a short hallway led directly to the main entrance of the bar, where bouncers typically checked identifications. There was no ground floor entrance directly into the establishment. This architectural bottleneck is the fulcrum upon which the entire case balances. Brian and Clint started their night at the Ugly Tuna, knocking back a few drinks. After a while, they decided to change the scenery and began a bar crawl down the street, moving southward into the Arena District. They hit several establishments, taking shots of hard liquor at each stop. By all accounts, including Clint's later statements, both men were heavily intoxicated. Sometime after midnight, the two men found themselves back near the South Campus Gateway. Clint had been texting a friend of his, a young woman named Meredith Reed. Meredith drove to the area, picked up Brian and Clint, and the trio decided to head back to where the night began for one last round before last call. They walked back into the Gateway complex, approached the escalator, and began the ride up to the second floor. It is exactly 1:15 in the morning on Saturday, April 1st. High-mounted above the escalator is a closed-circuit television camera. It is not a static camera. It is a panning camera, sweeping back and forth to cover the entrance area. As the camera pans across the top of the escalator, it captures Brian, Clint, and Meredith arriving on the second floor. The footage is standard mid-2000s security video. It is slightly grainy, washed in the harsh artificial light of the concourse. But the identities of the three individuals are indisputable. Brian is wearing a green, long-sleeved polo shirt, dark jeans, and white sneakers. He looks relaxed, talking to his friends. They walk into the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The bar is packed. It is spring break, and the college crowd is out in full force. The music is loud, the air is thick, and the space is crowded with bodies. Meredith and Clint find a spot near the bar, while Brian separates from them, presumably to say hello to other people he knows, or perhaps to get a drink or use the restroom. Time ticks by. The camera continues its mechanical panning outside the entrance. At 1:55 in the morning, just 5 minutes before the 2 o'clock closing time, the camera catches Brian again. He has stepped out of the main doors of the bar and is standing near the top of the escalator. He is talking to two young women. The interaction appears casual, perhaps a bit flirtatious. They speak for a few moments, and then the two women turn and begin to descend the escalator, leaving the complex. Brian stands at the top of the escalator. He turns away from the descending stairs and walks back toward the doors of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The camera pans away. This mundane, incredibly brief sequence of frames is the last confirmed, verified sighting of Brian Shaffer. It is the final entry in his digital footprint. Inside the bar, the lights come up, the universal signal for last call and clearing the house. The music fades, replaced by the chaotic hum of hundreds of intoxicated students being herded toward the exit. Clint and Meredith, ready to leave, look around for Brian. They scan the crowd milling around the bar. They check the restrooms, but they don't see him. Given how crowded the bar was, and assuming Brian might have just walked out ahead of them in the crush of people, Clint and Meredith leave the Ugly Tuna and ride the escalator down to the street. They stand outside on the pavement, expecting Brian to emerge at any moment. They wait. They call his cell phone. It rings but goes to voicemail. They wait a little longer. Finally, figuring he had simply decided to walk home without them, which wasn't entirely out of character for an intoxicated college student, Clint and Meredith call it a night. The weekend passes. Brian's father, Randy, tries to call him on Sunday, but the calls go straight to voicemail. Alexis, his girlfriend, also tries to reach him, assuming he is busy packing or studying. But by Monday morning, the anxiety metastasizes into full-blown panic. Monday is the day Brian and Alexis are supposed to fly to Miami. Alexis arrives at the airport, her bags packed, hoping against hope that Brian is simply running late and will meet her at the gate. The flight boards. The doors close. The plane takes off. Brian is not on it. The Columbus Police Department is notified, and a missing persons investigation is launched. Initially, police operate under the standard assumption that a missing adult will turn up within a few days. They often need time to cool off, sober up, or return from an unannounced detour. But as officers dig into Brian's background, realizing he is a reliable medical student with a prepaid flight and a waiting girlfriend, the temperature of the investigation rises dramatically. Investigators do what they always do in modern urban cases. They pull the security footage. They secure the tape from the camera overlooking the escalator at the Ugly Tuna Saloon. They review the footage from 1:15 in the morning, confirming Brian's arrival with Clint and Meredith. They fast forward to 1:55, watching Brian speak to the two women and turn back toward the bar. Then the investigators sit back and watch the footage of the bar emptying out. For the next hour, they watch a stream of patrons ride down the escalator. The police meticulously count every single person who leaves. They use a technique where they match the people entering the bar earlier in the night with the people leaving at closing time. It is a painstaking, frame-by-frame process. They account for every single patron. They identify the staff leaving. They identify the band members carrying their equipment down the escalator. They watch the crowd thin out until the concourse is completely empty. Brian Shaffer is not among them. He does not ride down the escalator. He does not walk past that camera. The detectives are baffled. They rewind the tape. They watch it again. They watch it at half speed. They zoom in on faces, on articles of clothing, on shadows. The result is always the same. Brian goes in, but he never comes out. The investigation immediately pivots. If he didn't leave through the front door, down the only public escalator, how did he get out? Law enforcement initiates an exhaustive search of the entire South Campus Gateway complex. They bring in search dogs. They search the dumpsters, the alleyways, the roof, the ventilation shafts. They learn that the building is still partially under construction. There is a service elevator located near the back of the Ugly Tuna, and behind the bar are doors leading into an unfinished construction site. This becomes the primary focus. Could Brian, heavily intoxicated and perhaps looking for a shortcut or a private place to relieve himself, have wandered through a back door and into the construction zone? The construction area is a labyrinth of raw concrete, exposed rebar, and temporary scaffolding. It is dangerous even in daylight. In the pitch black, for a drunk man, it would be treacherous. The police and search dogs scour every square inch of the construction site. The dogs pick up Brian's scent near the bar area, but the trail goes cold almost immediately. They find no trace of him in the unfinished sections. No torn clothing, no dropped cell phone, no body. Furthermore, the construction site itself was essentially sealed. The temporary doors leading out to the street were chained and padlocked from the inside. If Brian had managed to navigate the dark, hazardous construction zone, he would have found himself trapped behind locked doors. Even if he had somehow forced a door open, he would have stepped out onto an alleyway covered by other security cameras. The police checked those cameras too. Nothing. The anatomy of the vanishing begins to harden into a paradox. The primary exit is covered by a camera that proves he did not use it. The secondary, unauthorized exits lead either to locked doors or are covered by other cameras that show no movement. Theories begin to proliferate, each requiring a stretching of logic to fit the incredibly narrow confines of the evidence. Theory number 1 suggests that Brian was indeed captured on the main camera leaving the bar, but the panning motion of the lens caused a blind spot. The camera swept left, he walked right, and he slipped down the escalator in the 2 or 3 seconds he was out of frame. Investigators vehemently deny this possibility. They state they have analyzed the panning speed and the walking speed of a human being. They maintain that it is physically impossible for a man to travel from the entrance of the bar to the bottom of the escalator entirely within the camera's brief blind spots. Furthermore, he would have had to do so while perfectly obscured by a crowd that police say they successfully matched face-for-face entering and exiting. Theory number 2 posits that Brian left the bar in disguise. Did he put on a different jacket, a hat, or walk out with his head ducked down, hiding within a tight group of people? Police scrutinize the exiting crowd for anyone matching Brian's height, build, and lower body clothing. They find no one. The idea that a heavily intoxicated man orchestrated a spontaneous disguise to evade a camera he likely didn't even know or care was there seems wildly improbable. Theory number 3 dives into the dark realm of foul play within the bar itself. Did Brian get into an altercation with the staff or other patrons? Was he killed inside the Ugly Tuna and his body disposed of later? This theory requires a massive conspiracy. It requires a murder to take place in a packed bar without a single witness. It requires the staff to hide a body while police are actively searching the premises a day later, and then somehow smuggle that body out of the building without being caught on any of the exterior cameras. Despite extensive interviews with the bar staff and owners, no evidence of a fight, a cleanup, or a cover-up is ever found. The Ugly Tuna was entirely unblemished by any sign of violence. Theory number 4 is perhaps the most desperate. It suggests that Brian never left the building at all, dead or alive. It suggests he fell into a wall cavity, a ventilation shaft, or a foundation hole in the construction site, and was inadvertently sealed in by construction workers pouring concrete or putting up drywall the following Monday. Police considered this terrifying scenario. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. They reviewed construction schedules. They found no anomalies, no fresh concrete poured in areas where a body could be concealed. The case stalls. The physical evidence is a void. The digital evidence is a paradox. The psychological toll on the Shaffer family is incomprehensible. Randy Shaffer, having just buried his wife, now faces the total erasure of his eldest son. Randy becomes a fixture in the Columbus media. He organizes massive search parties, combs the banks of the Olentangy River, and consults with psychics when the police leads dry up. He refuses to let the city forget Brian's face. A shadow of suspicion briefly falls on Clint Florence, the friend who was with Brian that night. Clint provides his statements to the police, outlining their movements and the moment they lost track of Brian. But as the investigation drags on and the police look to rule people out definitively, they ask Clint to take a polygraph test. Clint, on the advice of legal counsel, refuses. This refusal ignites a firestorm of public speculation. In the court of public opinion, refusing a lie detector test is often equated with guilt. Amateur investigators and online forums dissect Clint's every word. Why would an innocent man refuse to help clear his name and find his friend? But from a legal and practical standpoint, a polygraph is a flawed instrument, inadmissible in court, and highly stressful. An attorney will almost always advise a client against taking one, especially in a high-profile, high-pressure case where the police are desperate for a break. Clint's refusal is his constitutional right, and the police publicly state they have no evidence whatsoever to suggest Clint had anything to do with Brian's disappearance. Yet, the refusal remains a sticking point for many who follow the case, a frustrating lack of a checkmark in an investigation starved for certainty. Years pass. The trail goes from cold to frozen. And then, in September 2008, a cruel twist of fate strikes the Shaffer family. Randy Shaffer is in his yard during a severe windstorm. A heavy branch snaps from a tree, striking Randy and killing him instantly. The man who had spent 2.5 years searching relentlessly for his son, who had become the public face of the tragedy, is gone. Following Randy's death, an obituary is posted online. In the digital guest book, an anonymous user leaves a message that reads, "To Dad, love Brian. Looking forward to seeing you in heaven." The message claims to be from the U.S. Virgin Islands. It is a massive shock to the system. Could Brian be alive? Could he have engineered his own disappearance, fled to the Caribbean to escape the grief of his mother's death and the pressure of his life, only to break his silence upon the death of his father? The FBI is brought in to trace the IP address of the comment. The investigation leads not to a beach in the Virgin Islands, but to a public computer in Franklin County, Ohio. It is determined to be a cruel hoax, a deeply disturbed prank played on a grieving family by a local internet troll. The spark of hope is extinguished just as quickly as it ignited. As we analyze the anatomy of this vanishing today, we are left staring at the same grainy footage from 2006. The case of Brian Shaffer is a terrifying reminder of the limits of our observational technology. A camera only records light bouncing off objects within its specific field of view. It does not record truth. It does not record intention. It does not record the spaces between the frames. Did Brian Shaffer orchestrate a masterful, voluntary disappearance to start a new life? The psychological profile, the recent death of his mother, the pressure of medical school, provides a motive, but the logistics of executing a perfect vanishing act while highly intoxicated, without leaving a paper trail, without ever accessing his bank accounts or contacting a soul for nearly 2 decades, borders on the impossible. Did he meet with a tragic accident, wandering into the dark corners of the city, falling into the river, his remains hidden by the cruel mechanics of nature? It remains the most statistically likely scenario, yet it fails to explain how he bypassed the camera and exited the building unseen. Or did he cross paths with someone bearing ill intent in the short walk between the second-floor bar and the street, an opportunistic crime that resulted in a perfectly concealed body? We dissect the evidence, the architecture, the psychology, and the technology, but the core of the mystery remains solid and impenetrable. Brian Shaffer is the ghost in the machine. He is the error in the system. The final image of him, turning back toward the crowded bar, frozen in the glare of the security light, is not just a piece of evidence. It is a monument to the unsettling reality that even under the watchful eye of a modern city, a human being can step into the shadows and never step out again. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.